Well, it's been a long project. It's been a long journey of my own, and sure, I could keep going with it. I think somebody once said that no project like this is never finished; it's only abandoned. There's so much more that could be written about. I haven't delved very deeply into his childhood in Delaware, and there may be more records there if somebody wanted to pursue that. But I think I've achieved my goals, which were to expose the lies, and also in some way to show how the lies are part of a narrative which has come to be known as the lost cause, which is a reinvention of the purpose of the Civil War. And I think that the perspicacious reader will see that there are resonances between the lost cause and the American stolen election narrative that we're living with today. And both of these are fictional narratives. And as fictional narratives, they need to be interrogated. The 2020 election has, of course, been investigated deeply by journalists and by lawyers and by detectives, and has been shown to be a creation, a manufactured creation that was developed to animate reactionary forces. Similarly, the lost cause was a manufactured creation developed to animate reactionary forces. And therefore, similarly, I believe we have a responsibility to interrogate the lost cause and the lies that were promulgated and expose them. And so I feel tremendous satisfaction that I have a small part in having done that for one individual who happens to have been written about by one of the architects of the lost cause, and that's Raphael Semmes.
Everybody, welcome back to Living the Next Chapter. I have somebody on my screen today as a guest, and he writes about some pretty amazing things in history. I love history, and I'm excited to see where this conversation goes. Andrew's here with us today. He has a great book out there in the world, Kidnapped at Sea, and we're going to get into some pretty amazing history and stories that are really going to inspire you. Great book for you to fall in love with. We'll have links for it in the show notes as always. But Andrew, welcome to the podcast. Welcome to Living the Next Chapter.
Oh, thank you so much for having me.
Excellent. Andrew, tell everybody where you are in this big world of ours.
I'm in the big borough of Brooklyn, New York.
I love New York City. I love every borough and every street. Everything feels like a movie set whenever I go to visit New York.
Yeah, and I grew up in Brooklyn. I lived much of my life overseas, but I've come back, and strangely enough, I'm living about a half a dozen blocks from where I grew up, which is a little bit of a mind fry, but on the other hand, I feel very comfortable here.
Very good. Tell us a little bit about your career, your background, Andrew. Like, what kind of things have you done in the past? And we're going to get into the book, but I'd like to kind of set the stage. What have you kind of done in the past? Give us some sense.
Well, I've had two careers. One and the other is a university administrator. I got my Ph.D. from the University of Pennsylvania in anthropology in 1981, and I ended up at the University of Cape Town in South Africa because my discipline was African archaeology, actually paleoanthropology, the study of early hominids in the Pleistocene. And I did that for many years, and it's there was a tremendous imperative for universities to transform, that is, to transform from historically white institutions to ones that represented the full population of the country. And that was going to be very expensive, and we needed to raise a lot of money in order to do that. And so I ended up becoming the first director of development for the University of Cape Town. And I did that until 2001. Then I returned to the States, and I ended up in the same job at my alma mater. I was director of development and vice president at Brooklyn College for about 12 years. And now I'm in semi-retirement, and I say semi because the semi part of it is writing. And one of the outcomes of the semi-retirement has been this book, Kidnapped at Sea.
Excellent. Amazing. So take us a little bit behind the scenes around the study of archaeology and all of that. I just love uncovering history and putting the pieces together like a big puzzle, trying to figure out people's stories and what these things are telling us as we look at artifacts. I picture people like the Indiana Jones character who loves all of those stories behind the scenes of these great things. What was the draw for you to fall in love with, especially the culture where you were down in Cape Town, but what was the draw to understand history better?
Well, I was interested in fossils since I was a child. And it was only when I was in graduate school, and I went to graduate school specifically because I wanted to study fossil humans. And I wanted to do something that was different from what had conventionally characterized the discipline. Conventionally, the discipline was all about anatomy, and I was interested in chemistry. So my research pertained to chemical signals in fossils that reveal something about diet or habitat or environment. And that's subsequently become quite an important part of the discipline. When I started, it was really on the margins, but it's become mainstreamed, which is very satisfactory to see. I went to South Africa because that's where humans evolved in Africa, and archaeology departments in Africa. Also, there was a phenomenal department there where people were doing similar kinds of research to me. So I had colleagues. You asked me, what was the attraction and what it was like. And I have to say, you came pretty close to it when you talked about it as being something of a puzzle or almost like a game. I would call it, it has qualities of a treasure hunt, but a treasure hunt with meaning. It's not a treasure hunt, for a piece of gold or for, some kind of meaningless artifact, but a treasure hunt for knowledge. And that was the most satisfying thing. I think I was very fortunate over these years that my vocation, which was as an archaeologist, was aligned with my avocation, which was my interest in the fossil record. And that's been a blessing for me. I've had a wonderful career doing that.
Any notable things that you were a part of as far as a discovery that just made you take a step back and be in awe that you're standing in a place like this and seeing something that hasn't been seen for many, many years?
Well, you asked the right question. If you, I was a co-discoverer of the earliest use of fire in the fossil record, and that was published in an article in Nature in 1988. We found remains of charred bones at an archaeological site called Swartkrans in Gauteng, which used to be called the Transvaal in South Africa. And that was quite an important discovery and one I'm very proud of. And now, actually, I'm coming back around to archaeological work. And I've got an article I hope to be coming out in the next month or two, which might be entitled How to Use Other People's Data for Purposes It Was Never Intended. And we'll see how that goes.
Well,
you'll have to wait and
there's
see.
times, Andrew, I can't even find my own keys. So to go and have somebody like you who can go in and find elements of life from many, many, many years ago, and just to stand there and try to imagine what life was like for them, how hard, how harsh life was, and how they had to overcome. Just to stand in that place, I would have to take a step back and just soak that moment in as a viewer of that happening in real time.
Well, it's interesting you say that because I think that was, in a strange way, that was preparation for me to write the book about David Henry White. Because David Henry White is an individual who was illiterate, and therefore there's almost nothing known about him. And so the perspective of an archaeologist is perhaps appropriate because archaeologists are used to studying people who left no written record of their existence. And so we're forced to use alternative strategies and information to try and reconstruct something meaningful about how they lived. And so I think that's part of the approach that I brought to the historical problem, even though I'm not trained as a historian.
Prior to writing your book, Kidnapped at Sea, has writing always been a part of your process and part of your history?
Well, I think my literary form is the academic and institutional grant proposal. I think I'm pretty good at that.
Right.
So, a nonfiction book was new territory for me.
What was a big challenge for you then to adapt your skills to write this book? What did you have to learn?
Oh, there were many challenges. I think some of the challenges were inherent to the project, and some of the challenges stemmed from how I set it up and the goals I set for myself. And I think to start with that, I wanted to write a book that had the rigor and legitimacy of an academic text and academic research, but the reach and the impact of a trade book, a popular book. And that was a difficult goal. I think I've learned that there is a word for it in the trade of crossover texts. And mine is definitely a crossover text. And it wasn't easy to find a publisher who would take that on because when I sent it to academic publishers, they said, this is great, but it's a trade book. I sent it to a trade publisher and said, this is great, but it's an academic book. And it went back and forth. But I stuck to my guns about not falling off too far on either side of the razor. And I hope that I was able to achieve both. Although I have been told by some who have read it that it's a book that can't decide if it's academic or trade. But that is definitely by design, not by accident.
Yeah, I like that.
So that was one challenge. And the way I dealt with that challenge, and it was tricky because if you're writing in any discipline, you're expected to know the canon and academic discourse. And in my case, I had no pretense of being a historian. And obviously, there's a tremendous amount of literature about the Civil War and about lost cause and about racism of the time. And I had to incorporate all of that. First of all, I had to learn it. Then I had to incorporate it. I had to find a way to incorporate it that didn't detract from the core story that I wanted to tell, which is the story of David Henry White's life. And I ended up doing that by writing the book as, to use a reference from the art world, as a triptych. That is, as three panels. A triptych is a work of art that has a center a picture, and then two side panels that refer to the picture. And what I ended up doing is writing a book that had a side panel that was context, a central panel that was the story, and then a third panel, a side panel, that was analysis and conclusions. And that enabled me to put much of the academic discourse to the sides and then focus on the story in the center of the book. At the same time, it enabled me to keep David Henry White at the center of the book where I thought he belonged.
Excellent. So
that
tell
was
us
the
more
second.
about David Henry White. Yeah, well, tell us more about this character.
Just I will in a moment, but it's quite appropriate because David Henry White himself is the third challenge, and that is the challenge of how do you write about someone for whom there is virtually no information except secondary sources. Primary sources are exceedingly rare. And so I had to figure out a way to convey what I could about his life without the kinds of information that are available for histories of literate people. Letters, tax records, and that sort of newspaper articles, journalism, that sort of thing. None of that was really there. So it was a different kind. It was really an excavation. I'm using that word as an archaeologist, but it was an excavation of the archives as much as anything else. What was the rest of your question? I've lost the thought. You can edit this part out.
I would like to just know more about the character and how did you land on David Henry White, and kind of where was the source for you to be drawn to his story in particular?
Well, yeah, let me just say one other thing first. You can edit in wherever you want. Another problem I had is another problem I had was how to write this book without appearing to merely, no, stop this. Okay, let's go back to what the story, I'm going to tell you what the book is, then we can get into this thing.
Okay, sure.
So the book really is three stories. The first story is the story of David Henry White, his life. He was a free Black teenager from Lewis, Delaware, who got a gig on a packet ship, that is a sailing ship that carried both passengers and cargo, from Philadelphia to Liverpool in October of 1862, right in the middle of the Civil War. And he's on the ship as a cook, 9 days out to sea. And the ship is captured. The ship he's on is called the Tonawanda. And the Tonawanda was captured by a Confederate commerce raider called the Alabama. Now, the Confederacy responded to the American blockade of the South by arming commerce raiders who traveled all over the world, the North Atlantic, the South Atlantic, the Indian Ocean, and attacked Union commerce. This particular ship, the Alabama, over 600 days, burned or captured over 60 Union vessels. It was a major aspect of the Civil War that most people are unaware of. We're all aware of the Civil War on land because of the horrific carnage. There wasn't so much carnage on the high seas, but there was a very important economic war going on. And the Alabama was right at the heart of all of that. Anyway, 9 days into the Tonawanda voyage, it encounters the Alabama, and Captain Raphael Semmes of the Alabama captures White, takes him from the Tonawanda, and enslaved him on the Alabama, where he remained for the rest of the voyage until he drowned in a final climactic battle off Cherbourg on June 19th, 1864. So that's the main part of the book, is the story of David Henry White and the documentation that he was free. The other story is how White's life was appropriated by Semmes in his memoir as an example of a Black individual who supported the Confederacy and who was a content slave, happy in servitude, and willing to serve the Alabama's officers, and in fact had congratulated himself on the change from the Tonawanda to the Alabama. So the second part of the book is the exposure of the lies, that his life was appropriated. Everything that Semmes wrote about White turns out to be untrue when tested against the primary documentary record in Philadelphia. So that's the second story. And then the third, just to make things a little bit more complex, is a kind of meditation on the leadership qualities of the two captains in the final battle of Cherbourg. That is Semmes, who was the captain of the Alabama, and a man named John Ancrum Winslow, who was the captain of the Kearsarge, which was the American vessel that finally caught up with the Alabama and vanquished it in a climactic battle 7 miles off Cherbourg. So those are the three stories that the book tells. they're interwoven as best as I could.
Excellent. So for a reader, Andrew,
Okay,
first time coming to the book.
we're going to stop there and we're going to go back to what your original question. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah. No, no. What's the question now? I've lost my train of thought.
Yeah. No. I originally was asking about
Give me a second.
how you came across David Henry White and why he was such an attraction for you as for the main character for your book.
Okay. So I've been working on this book for on and off, believe it or not, for about 30 years. And I first encountered the story of the Alabama in Cape Town, of all places. I was a lecturer at the University of Cape Town in 1988, 87 or 88, and I'd gone downtown for a haircut, and I'm walking by a building that's got a sign uh, advertising itself as the Cultural History Museum, free admission on Wednesdays, and on a whim, and I was astonished to find this giant Confederate battle ensign. And I said to myself, what is this doing here? It's completely ahistorical. Why would there be a Confederate flag in Cape Town? And so I started investigating it because I felt like one of the few Americans in South Africa at that time. I kind of felt a responsibility to understand what was going on. And I became fascinated with the vessel and its officers, and particularly fascinated with not only Semmes, but also the man who vanquished him, Winslow. And it came to me as a kind of a tortoise and hare allegory, that Semmes was extremely aggressive, very successful right out of the gate, took on battles wherever he could. Winslow, back in 1862, was sick as a dog. He had malaria, he had a disease destroying his right eye. He was confined to bed. He hated the war. He was very unhappy that Lincoln hadn't emancipated into slaves before the Emancipation Proclamation. He was despondent. And then after the Emancipation Proclamation at the end of 1862, he got enthused about the war again because he was an avid abolitionist, a deeply religious Christian abolitionist. And so even though he was ill, he accepted this command of the Kearsarge, and over the course of 2 years, searched the world looking for the Alabama until he eventually caught up with Semmes off Cherbourg. And I was interested in the leadership capacities of these two men. Their qualities were very different. I'll let the reader see for themselves how they were different. But that was one major impetus for me to write this. And then a few years in, as I got into it, I was reading Semmes' memoir, in which he describes the slave, David Henry White, who congratulated himself on the trade he had made from the Tonawanda. And I said to myself, this can't be true. This just can't be true. It made no sense. It only made sense if you had completely bought into the trope of the happy servant, that was portrayed in popular culture in America right up until the 1940s, Gone with the Wind. So I wanted to find it out, and so I embarked upon a research project, an archival research project, to see what I could find out about David White. And I immediately found out that he was free from the census records, but then I was really lucky to strike gold in the archives of the Pennsylvania Historical Society that had the manifests of the ship that he was on. And the manifests told the true story, that he was free, that he was employed, what his salary was, for example. And then, it became a kind of a forensic investigation at that point. And one of the things I do in the book is I enumerate all of the lies that Sims told about white. So the text is there of what Sims had to say about white, and then the text is tested against the documentary record. And just to give you one example, Sims writes, his condition was in every respect bettered, and we gave him the pay of his grade, and he was happy as the day was long. Well, that's interesting because on the Alabama, according to the manifests, he was paid $9 a month with the title of boy. Boy was, both white and black youngsters served on 19th century vessels as boys. It was the most junior position. And that was what white was recorded as in Alabama. Well, on the Tonawanda, he was a cook and he was paid $15 a month. So Sims bettered, quote unquote, bettered his situation with a demotion and lowering his pay. So that is the kind of forensic revelation that takes place in the manuscript.
I like how you unpack that for us. That's good.
Yeah. And so, I mean, I think that's it. Anything else I would add to that? You asked me what the book's about. And that's it. Those things.
Good. As far as when you wrote the book, that you have historical facts, you have research, you have all the documentation to reference. Is there creative license that you have to lean on to kind of fill in some of the cracks in the story to make the book complete?
Well, that's a great question. That's a really good question. The answer is yes, within strict limits. So I felt that in order for this book to not appropriate White's life, I had to stick to the facts. And I might add, there's another challenge that I faced, which I was personally aware of, that I'm a white person writing about a black person, and that's these days that's fraught, and I believe rightly so. We know that Ken Burns was attacked for appropriating the life of Ali, and I understand why. This case is a little different because I'm not writing about a well-known or even a known figure. Mine is not a question of appropriation, I believe. It's a question of recovery. And it's a kind of a first stage revelation. And in order to be true to that, I felt I had to stick to the facts. I didn't want to get inside David White's head. It wasn't for me to do it. If I did, it would simply be appropriating him, substituting one appropriation for another. And that was out of the question. So my approach was, first of all, only stick to the facts. Having said that, there was a lot more that I could write about him. I couldn't write about what he thought, but I could write about what he experienced. And so much of the book follows his journey on the Alabama through the experiences of what happened on the Alabama as seen through his eyes, as much as I could recover what he saw. And I also thought, the mind, well, put it this way, it's impossible to write a biography of a ghost. I wasn't writing a biography. I was trying to describe his experiences. And I thought, well, if the mind is like a vessel, I couldn't describe what was in the vessel. I didn't know what he thought. But I could describe the walls of the vessel, or more appropriately, the mold from which the vessel was made, what were the forces that were acting upon him as he was kidnapped, as he went through this voyage, as he experienced the battle, as his eventual demise. And so that was the approach I took to write about what he experienced mainly. Also, I took the approach, your authors who are interested in history may be aware of the French historian Ivan Jablanka, who has written a lot about the history of the disempowered. And Jablanka makes some interesting points and suggests that history can be made more accessible by using techniques of literature. And so that is an approach that I took in the book. I used as many techniques of literature as I could to enliven the narrative and to illuminate White's experiences. And so the kinds of techniques that I use are, first of all, storytelling. There's an awful lot of storytelling in the book, metaphor, allegory, and so on. All those techniques are incorporated into the narrative, and I hope that makes up for what cannot be told because we have no idea what White actually thought, and because there are no letters to home that describe his experience.
Yeah. That has to be a challenge to be able to, again, fill in the blanks. And I'm glad to hear how you, again, unpack that for us as readers so that we'll understand kind of where we're going in the story. And I love the fact, too, that you're holding as true as you can to the historical records you have. That's great.
Thank you. Thank you.
So as an author, then, how satisfied are you with the end result of the book? What brings you joy as you talk about the book to readers? Tell me about that part of it as well.
Well, it's been a long project. It's been a long journey of my own. And sure, I could keep going with it. I think somebody once said that no project like this is never finished. It's only abandoned. There's so much more that could be written about. I haven't delved very deeply into his childhood in Delaware. And there may be more records there if somebody wanted to pursue that. But I think I've achieved my goals, which were to expose the lies and also in some way to show how the lies are part of a narrative which has come to be known as the lost cause, which is a reinvention of the purpose of the Civil War. And I think that the perspicacious reader will see that there are resonances between the lost cause and the American stolen election narrative that we're living with today. And both of these are fictional narratives. And as fictional narratives, they need to be interrogated. The 2020 election has, of course, been investigated deeply by journalists and by lawyers and by detectives, and has been shown to be a creation, a manufactured creation that was developed to animate reactionary forces. Similarly, the lost cause was a manufactured creation developed to animate reactionary forces. And therefore, similarly, I believe we have a responsibility to interrogate the lost cause and the lies that were promulgated and expose them. And so I feel tremendous satisfaction that I have a small part in having done that for one individual who happens to have been written about by one of the architects of the lost cause, and that's Raphael Semmes.
Excellent. Again, I love anything historical, so you have me hooked just in this conversation alone. Andrew, I'm really excited about this book and it being out in the world. For people listening to the podcast, Andrew, and they want to know more about you and the research behind the book and possibly connect with you as the author, is there a great place to send people where they can reach out to you in person?
Yes, they can go to the website for the book, which is kidnapped@sea.com. And we'll also upload this podcast there when it comes out, and a link to the podcast when it comes out. And I'll also update edit that out. Let me start again. Yeah, sure. They can go to the website of the book, kidnapped@sea.com, one word, kidnapped@sea.com. And there I'll provide regular updates and also appearances as they come up.
Excellent.
And I look forward to responses to the book.
Yes, good. And leave great reviews when you buy the book so that more people fall in love with it as well, wherever you purchase it. Andrew, one last question as we leave. The name of the show is Living the Next Chapter. Mm-hmm. So I got to ask, for you as an author, as a creative person, and very rich with your history, how and what are you doing to live your next chapter now that this book's out in the world?
Well, first, I'm very excited that I may have a new article coming out about my archaeological research. And that's kind of a capstone of my core. And after that's out, I may have one or two more archaeology articles after that. I don't know. And then I'm thinking, I'm not ready to fully retire. I'm going to continue in semi-retirement as a writer, and I'm beginning to think about a book about human evolution, which is my core area of interest. And I'm particularly interested in writing about how human evolution, can be made interesting and relevant to people living today. My concern is that paleoanthropology has not really become a terribly relevant discipline. It's quite arcane, and I believe there are lessons from the fossil record that are germane to those of us alive today, and I'd like to write about that.
That sounds intriguing. I like this a lot. Andrew, that sounds very interesting. Thank you so much for doing this, Andrew. Thank you for sharing the story behind the book. When we see a book on a website or on a store shelf, as a reader, we have questions in our mind. Is this the right book for me? Am I going to enjoy the story and the author? So that's why we do the show, to connect readers with you. And now we have some great information. We understand how the book was created, why, and the story from Cape Town, and all of those pieces, like we go back to archaeology, all of those little pieces of your story put together in a podcast now gives us a really good view of the book and how this is going to resonate with us as a reader. So thank you so much for sharing the behind the scenes of the book and your story as an author.
Thank you. I really enjoyed talking with you.
Excellent. Everyone, all the information is always in the show notes for Andrew. Please go to his website, buy a copy of the book, buy a second copy of the book, and send it to someone you love. Leave a great review so that people know why you love this book so much. And if you love history, and like I do, you're going to fall in love with this book and another great author. Andrew, thank you so much for doing this.
Thank you.
Hey, thanks for being here for the Living the Next Chapter podcast. So glad to have you as part of our family of listeners. There's a seat for you just here on Living the Next Chapter, and I'm so happy that you have listened to all the way to the end. Wow, you are now my new bestie. I want to let you know that I host 7 other podcasts on top of Living the Next Chapter. Yep, 8 total. One of them is called the How To Podcast series. If you are thinking, you know what, Dave, this podcast thing seems like a lot of fun. Well, I'll give you a secret. It is. It's a great, amazing, fun time where you can get to meet great people, get your word out there, promote your book, promote what your coaching program, whatever you're doing. Podcasting is great. And if you want to learn how to do this, what you're hearing right now, head over to howtopodcast.ca and look up the How to Podcast series on YouTube, whatever app you're listening on. You'll find me there. And I'd love for you to come listen to how to do this. And if you're interested and have questions on how to podcast, reach out to me at howtopodcast.ca. Thank you for listening. Talk soon.